Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the fourth episode here on our series, The Road to Revolution, Monarchy, Power, and Debt. So, we'll continue to our events. So far, we're left over to the introduction of this new minister, this new finance minister, this Scottish murderer that escaped England and came to France to play his luck in introducing new monetary policies and try to fix the disastrous situation of debt and taxes that was occurring in France. So, at first glance, John Law seemed like a true magician and everyone was overjoyed. The next step was to introduce the banknote. The bank began issuing not shares, but what we will recognize today as banknotes, like money, bills. These were standardized identical notes printed with the words payable on demand to the bearer. In theory, the idea was that the $50 note was like, in this case, monopoly money. It wasn't worth $50 in cash on its own, but it represented a promise from the bank. If you brought the note to the bank, they would exchange it for $50 in cash, or its equivalent. It had value within the system, but only because the bank guaranteed it. John Law's system was simple. Publish and print banknotes, each one bearing all the necessary signatures, and just as we'll have today. The signature of the bank's treasurer guaranteed the notes with the words "the bank promises to pay on demand to the bearer" written on them. At first, people were happy with the bank's shares, which paid good returns. So, when it came to the banknotes, the public accepted them fairly willingly as well. After all, deep down, everyone thought, "I'll keep my gold in the safe and avoid spending it. As long as we're using these bills, it's fine." And this was exactly what John Law wanted. His plan was to eventually outlaw gold and silver, and only paper would circulate. And who guaranteed that the bank would pay? Well, the monarchy. Believing in Law's brilliance, the regent gave his full support, ensuring the bills were backed by the crown. After a while, people began to realize that the system was working well, so they decided to start printing banknotes. These notes were theoretically backed by the bank's capital. But soon enough, they began to feel it was a missed opportunity to stop there. It was so exciting to print money and see it circulate, and on top of that, the national debt was actually going down. This was a wonderful outcome. They started collecting the old promissory notes and replacing them with new banknotes. At the beginning, John Law's economic policies appeared to be effective, but the truth was they couldn't guarantee all these banknotes with the capital they had in the vaults. That's when Law came up with another brilliant idea. This was the beginning of France's colonial expansion, and the country believed it could become a major colonial power. By the end of the 1700s, France controlled Canada, Louisiana, and the Antille Islands, and they had big plans for expanding in America. They were convinced that America would bring in vast wealth, so the banknotes were now backed by the promise that all the wealth from America would soon come pouring in. John Law set in motion a financial experiment with the backing of the monarchy. He established a trading company that was closely tied to the bank he had already founded. This company was granted the exclusive right to conduct all trade with the French colonies. It was a monopoly of immense scale. The control over tobacco, sugar, and other lucrative goods from the New World. Opportunities seemed endless, like discovering an economic El Dorado. Overjoyed, the public placed their trust in Law once again. Confidence grew as his bank and the trading company became intertwined. But Law's ambitions did not stop at trade. The government extended yet another privilege to his enterprise, the exclusive right to collect taxes on behalf of the crown. Traditionally, tax collection had been managed by private entrepreneurs, but now Law and his company took control of that as well. With these monopolies, bank shares circulated widely, and paper money issued by Law's bank became a standard means of exchange. The influence he acquired was unprecedented. He was not only the head of the bank, but also the president of the company that monopolized colonial trade and the company responsible for collecting taxes. Excitement spread as the value of shares soared. Investors rushed in, eager to participate in what seemed like an unstoppable wave of prosperity. It was one of the first bubbles in history, later known as the Mississippi Bubble, named after the Mississippi Company, which had been formed to exploit the wealth of French territories in the American colonies. Fortunes were made, and it seemed like wealth had no limits. For the first time in the history of French language, a new word was coined: millionaire. People began talking about the wealthy individuals who had made fortunes speculating on shares, amassing millions of livres in the process. The regent, eager to extend the Law's influence even further, decided to appoint him to the position of Minister of Finance, which was still vacant. However, there's a little problem. This was the deeply Catholic Kingdom of France. While the regent was openly atheist and held orgies on Easter, a Protestant Scotsman like Law couldn't become minister in such a Catholic realm. John Law, who had long been interested in Catholicism, began spending time with the Jesuits and eventually converted, of course. With his conversion, he could now take the role of Minister of Finance. Now that he had complete control, he set his plan into motion. Slowly, he began to phase out gold and silver, leaving only banknotes in circulation. To push this shift, he started applying pressure. This mirrors today's effort to reduce cash and use and promote electronic currency, which could one day replace the physical money. Law took the first step by passing a law banning people from holding more than 500 livres in gold at home. Soon, anonymous reports flooded in, and the police began raiding homes to seize illegal gold. People grew concerned, and as the banknotes still promised payable on demand to the bearer. This meant in simple terms that tomorrow they could go to the bank and get 1,000 livres in gold back. As the public began to suspect that the government had control of the gold and might soon make it illegal, a sense of worry started to spread. People began to voice concerns, with journalists and public figures openly criticizing the minister. In an absolute monarchy like France, speaking out against the government had severe consequences. Those who protested were arrested and sent to the colonies. After that, official protests ceased. But the anxiety lingered in the background. Soon enough, some of the wealthiest and most influential figures, including the nobles like the Duke of Bourbon and the Prince of Conti, who had the right connections and information, decided to act. They cashed in their banknotes for gold. Insider trading, of course, wasn't invented by us in our modern times. One day, the public watched as the Duke of Bourbon, the king's cousin, arrived at the bank, accompanied by servants carrying suitcases full of banknotes. He went directly to the counter and exchanged all of them for gold coins. If you recall, these are also the old IOUs, the old banknotes that were created earlier, that were amassed, the ones that were purchased for less of their values. So all the nobles, they were smarter than normal people. They could just go in and cash for gold. The crowd rushed to the bank's headquarters on Rue Quincampoix, a narrow street just behind the stock exchange in Paris, even today. As people pushed and shoved to get in, 17 people were crushed to death at the bank's doors. The bank initially paid out, but soon shut his doors. The regent had no choice but to announce that the banknotes were no longer valid. "We're sorry, but we won't pay anyone," the treasurer and the bank director, who had signed the banknotes, were promptly sent to the Bastille. John Law, having received a tip, managed to escape in time, fleeing the kingdom. He made his way to Venice, where he found safety, eventually dying there years later. At this point, complaints were everywhere, and many speculators had been ruined. The regent handled the situation with a surprising level of dignity. One of the things that would astonish people even today was his decision to pay back some of the defrauded savers, using whatever little funds remained. They started by compensating the small investors, most of whom managed to recover at least part of what they had lost. Unfortunately, many larger investors were left devastated. In the end, the public debt had mostly disappeared, not because it was repaid, but because it had been converted into shares of the Mississippi Company, which ultimately became worthless. This effectively relieved the monarchy's financial burden, but came at a devastating cost, a massive default that left investors and creditors ruined. The disaster caused by Law's policies fostered a distrust in paper currency that continued for the next 100 years. You may be wondering, well, we're still far from the French Revolution. When do we get there? Well, we're still in 1720. But in reality, the collapse of the Mississippi bubble, with all the chaos it caused, gave the monarchy an unexpected sense of relief. Well, we've seen how emotions got high, greed took in, human nature as always, thinking that the line would keep on going up forever and people could still generate enormous profits and the party will still keep on going forever, but that was not the case. Eventually, the system fell apart, also because of distrust. Distrust because the government basically had something against gold and silver, and people did not trust it. And also because, as it happens, the banks did not have enough gold reserves in order to pay the same value of bills that were circulating. And that's never a good ending, a good outcome. For some time, France will just experiment with different economic policies from different economists, because what else do they have to lose if they don't have any other ideas? Some ideas or a bad idea for them, they didn't know the results, was better than none. We'll find out the rest in the next episodes. Thank you very much for following up, and I will see you next time. Bye.